The deep red SUV pulled up in front of the modest suburban home, its chrome trim glinting under the midday sun. David stepped out, his military-issue boots crunching on the gravel driveway as he made his way to the front door. Clutched in his hand was a neatly folded American flag, its crimson and white stripes a stark contrast against his dark slacks. Steeling himself, he rang the doorbell and waited, his jaw set with determination. This was his home, his property, and he'd be damned if anyone was going to tell him he couldn't fly the flag he had fought for. The door swung open, revealing a well-coiffed woman in an expensive floral dress. Her eyes narrowed as she took in David's uniform and the flag in his hand. "Can I help you?" she asked, a hint of condescension in her tone. "Ma'am, my name is David Reynolds. I live here, and I'd like to hang this flag on my own home." The woman's expression hardened. "I'm afraid I can't allow that. It's against the HOA regulations." David felt a surge of indignation. "With all due respect, ma'am, I'm a veteran. This flag means everything to me. I have a right to display it." "Not in this neighborhood. You don't," she snapped. "The rules are very clear. Now, I suggest you take that flag and leave." David's grip tightened on the fabric, his knuckles turning white. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I'm putting up that flag." The woman's eyes narrowed to slits. "If you do, you'll be fined." Heavily. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. "And don't think you can just ignore it. We have our ways of making sure you comply." The door slammed shut, leaving David standing on the porch, the flag clenched in his fist. His jaw worked as he fought to keep his temper in check. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Turning on his heel, he marched back to his SUV and climbed behind the wheel, his mind racing. He knew his rights, and he knew the law. This HOA wasn't going to push him around, not after everything he'd sacrificed for his country. With a determined set to his shoulders, David pulled out of the driveway and headed for the office of his longtime friend and attorney, Rebecca Stern. The sleek, modern office of Stern and Associates law firm loomed before David as he pulled into the parking lot. He strode through the revolving glass doors, his expression grim. Rebecca's secretary, a young woman with a sharp eye and an efficient manner, greeted him. "Mr. Reynolds, how can I help you today?" "I need to speak with Rebecca. It's urgent." The secretary nodded, quickly ushering him back to Rebecca's office. The door was open, and the seasoned attorney looked up as David entered. "David, what's going on?" she asked, concern etched on her face. David quickly explained the confrontation with the HOA president, his grip tightening on the folded flag. "I know my rights, Rebecca. I fought for this country, and I'll be damned if some stuck-up HOA is going to tell me I can't fly the American flag on my own property." Rebecca held up a hand, her brow furrowed. "Slow down, David. Let me think this through." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I need you to file a formal complaint with the HOA. Document everything. The conversation, the threats, the potential fines. I'll back you up with a strongly worded letter outlining your rights as a homeowner and a veteran." David nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "And if that doesn't work?" "Then we take them to court," Rebecca said firmly. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005 is very clear on this. They can't prohibit you from flying the flag, even if it's against their bylaws." A spark of hope flared in David's chest. "You really think we can win this?" Rebecca offered him a reassuring smile. "With the law on our side and your military service record, I have no doubt. This HOA is going to learn the hard way not to mess with a veteran." David felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Rebecca. I knew I could count on you." "That's what friends are for," she replied, already reaching for her phone. "Now let's get this ball rolling. I have a feeling this is going to be a fight worth watching." The next morning, David arrived home to find a bright yellow envelope taped to his front door. Heart pounding, he ripped it open and pulled out the crisp, official-looking document. $500 fine for failure to comply with HOA regulations. He read aloud, his jaw tightening. Failure to pay within 30 days will result in additional penalties and possible legal action. He crumpled the paper in his fist, anger coursing through him. This was exactly what Rebecca had warned him about. The HOA was not going to back down without a fight. Striding into the house, he placed the flag on the kitchen table and quickly composed a formal complaint, detailing the confrontation with the HOA president and the subsequent fine. With a few quick taps, he sent the document off to Rebecca, knowing she would waste no time in drafting her response. True to form, his phone chimed just an hour later with a message from his friend. "Got your complaint. I'm drafting a letter as we speak. Stay put. I'll be over in 30 minutes. True to her word, Rebecca arrived at his doorstep, a briefcase in hand. David ushered her inside, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "I can't believe they're doing this," he said, shaking his head. "After everything I've done for this country." Rebecca placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know, David. But we're going to fight this, I promise you. This HOA has picked the wrong veteran to mess with." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick, crisp letter, its letterhead emblazoned with the Stern & Associates logo. "This letter outlines your rights under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, as well as the fact that you are a decorated veteran. I've made it very clear that any further attempts to fine or harass you will result in immediate legal action." David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "You're the best, Rebecca. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You be drowning in HOA fines, that's what," she replied with a wink. "Now let's get this delivered. I have a feeling the president is going to be in for a rude awakening." The next day, David watched as the HOA president's sleek sedan pulled into the driveway of the modest house 2 doors down. He gripped the letter from Stern & Associates in his hand, his heart pounding with anticipation. The woman emerged from her car, her expression pinched and irritated. David waited with bated breath as she approached the front door, then rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door swung open, and David could see the woman's face go pale as she read the contents of the envelope. He couldn't hear the conversation, but the woman's gestures grew increasingly frantic, her mouth moving rapidly. After a few tense minutes, she turned and stormed back to her car, peeling out of the driveway in a cloud of gravel. David couldn't suppress a triumphant grin. Rebecca's letter had clearly done the trick. He watched as the woman's car disappeared down the street, knowing that the battle had only just begun. Later that evening, his phone buzzed with a call from Rebecca. "Well, that was quick," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "The HOA president just called, and she's not happy." David chuckled. "I can only imagine. What did she say?" "She tried to argue that your flag display was a violation of their bylaws, but I shut that down real quick. I reminded her about the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act and your status as a veteran. She wasn't thrilled, to say the least." "So what happens now?" David asked, a note of concern in his voice. "For now, they're backing off. But I have a feeling this isn't over. The HOA board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your case. They may try to find some other way to force you to take the flag down." David's jaw tightened. "Well, they're welcome to try. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not taking that flag down. Not now. Not ever." "That's what I figured you'd say," Rebecca replied, a smile in her voice. "Don't worry, David. I've got your back. We're going to fight this thing all the way to the end." "I know you do," David said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thanks, Rebecca. I couldn't do this without you." "That's what friends are for," she said simply. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." The following morning, David watched anxiously as the members of the HOA board began to arrive, their expensive cars lining the street in front of his modest home. He knew they were here to discuss his flag display, and he steeled himself for the confrontation to come. Soon, the front door opened, and the HOA president emerged, her expression pinched and severe. She marched down the driveway, her eyes narrowed as she approached David, who stood on his porch, the American flag draped over his arm. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice laced with barely contained disdain, "I assume you received our letter regarding the fine for your flag display." David nodded, his jaw set. "I did. And I've also received a letter from my attorney, outlining my rights as a veteran to display the American flag on my own property." The woman's lips thinned to a tight line. "Well, the HOA board has discussed your case, and we've decided that your flag display is still in violation of our bylaws." David felt a surge of anger. "With all due respect, ma'am, your bylaws don't supersede federal law. I have every right to fly this flag, and I'm not taking it down." "Then you leave us no choice," the woman snapped. "We're going to take this to court. You'll be facing fines, possible liens on your property, and even a threat of foreclosure if you continue to defy us." David's grip tightened on the flag, his knuckles turning white. "I've fought for this country, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some HOA bully me in my own home. Bring it on. I'll see you in court." The woman's eyes narrowed to slits. "So be it, Mr. Reynolds. You've been warned." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to the gathering of board members, her body language radiating fury. David watched her go, a grim sense of determination settling over him. He knew this was only the beginning, but he was ready to fight. This flag, and everything it represented, meant too much to him to back down now. The courthouse was a bustling hive of activity as David and Rebecca made their way through the ornate marble halls. The air was thick with tension as they approached the courtroom where the HOA's lawsuit was set to be heard. David's palms were sweating, but his gaze was unwavering. He had the law on his side, and he was determined to stand his ground. As they entered the courtroom, the HOA president and several members of the board were already seated, their expressions stern and unyielding. David took a deep breath and followed Rebecca to the defendant's table, his military-issue boots echoing on the polished floor. The judge, a stern-faced man with graying hair, entered and took his seat, his gavel striking the wooden podium with a resounding thud. "This court will come to order. We are here today to hear the case of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association versus David Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you are being sued for failure to comply with the HOA's bylaws regarding the display of flags on your property. How do you plead?" David rose, his shoulders squared. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I have the right as a veteran to display the American flag on my own property, as protected by the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. The judge nodded, his gaze shifting to the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. "Very well. Proceed, counselor." The HOA's attorney stood, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, the Willow Creek Homeowners Association has clear bylaws regarding the display of flags and other outdoor decorations. Mr. Reynolds is in blatant violation of these rules, and we are seeking immediate compliance, as well as reimbursement for the fines he has already incurred." Rebecca rose, her expression calm and confident. "Your Honor, my client is a decorated veteran who has served this country with honor and distinction. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act explicitly protects his right to fly the flag on his own property, regardless of any HOA bylaws to the contrary." The judge held up a hand, silencing the attorneys. "I'm well aware of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, counselor. The question is whether the HOA's bylaws can supersede federal law in this case." David felt a flicker of hope as the judge's gaze settled on him, a hint of understanding in his expression. The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered the arguments from both sides. David could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is clear on this matter. Homeowners associations cannot prohibit the display of the American flag, even if it violates their own bylaws. David felt a surge of relief, but the judge was not finished. However, the judge continued, the act does allow for reasonable restrictions on the size, location, and manner of the flag display. The HOA is within its rights to enforce regulations that are content neutral and applied uniformly to all residents. The HOA president's lips curled into a triumphant smile, but the judge raised a hand, silencing her. That being said, Mr. Reynolds is a veteran who has served this country with honor. His display of the American flag is an expression of his patriotism and should be protected to the fullest extent of the law. The judge turned his gaze to the HOA's attorney. I'm ruling in favor of the defendant. The HOA is prohibited from fining Mr. Reynolds or taking any further action to prevent him from displaying the American flag on his property. However, the flag must adhere to the HOA's reasonable, content-neutral regulations regarding size and placement. David felt a weight lift from his shoulders as Rebecca squeezed his arm, a broad smile on her face. The HOA president, on the other hand, looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. As they exited the courthouse, David turned to Rebecca, his eyes shining with gratitude. I can't thank you enough, Rebecca. You really came through for me. Rebecca chuckled, her expression warm. That's what friends are for, David. Now, let's go home and get that flag properly displayed. In the days that followed, David carefully positioned the American flag on a sturdy pole in his front yard, ensuring it adhered to the HOA's regulations. The stars and stripes fluttered proudly in the breeze, a symbol of the freedom and sacrifice he had fought for. As he stood back to admire his work, a sense of peace and contentment washed over him. He had won this battle, but he knew the war was far from over. The HOA would no doubt continue to challenge him, looking for any loophole or technicality to try and force him to take the flag down. But David was undaunted. He had the law on his side, and he had Rebecca, a tireless advocate who was willing to go to the mat for him. He would continue to stand his ground, no matter what the HOA threw his way. As the days turned into weeks, the flag remained, a constant reminder of David's service and the principles he had fought to defend. The HOA board members would occasionally pass by, their expressions sour, but they dared not take any further action. David knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous fight, but he was prepared to see it through. This flag, and everything it represented, was worth fighting for. In the end, David's unwavering determination and Rebecca's legal expertise had won the day, and the American flag continued to fly proudly over his modest suburban home, a testament to the enduring spirit of a veteran who refused to be silenced.